encourage your soul, enlighten your mind, and empower your faith. This is the Light Network. Conversations about life, Christianity, and culture. Welcome into Four Preachers and a Podcast from Henderson, Tennessee. My name is Robert Hatfield from Moulton, Alabama, complete with reading more than you this year mode. It's Brad McNutt. What's up, Brad?
Just a few bricks shy of a low, but I'm good today, I guess.
That's great. That's great. And now with Dr. Pepper dispensing arm, it's Chance Hicks. What's going on, Chance?
I'm thinking about headed to downtown Charleston.
Okay. All right. That's good. And playing Prophet Roulette, it's Hiram Kemp. What's going on, Hiram?
Nothing much. Jesus paid it all, you know.
Amen. We agree with that statement. It's not funny.
You do?
We agree with it.
It's a good song.
Right.
It's a good song.
Yes. We're glad that Hiram's with us today. You were not able to be with us for episode 1 of our mini-series. So what were you doing? I mean, where were you at?
I was in the wind somewhere. I don't know. When did y'all record it?
This time last week.
Oh, yeah. I was out of town, man.
Oh, okay. Of course you were, man. All right. Well, that's good. We are on part 2 of our mini-series, and we're talking about church hurt. So that's sort of where we're headed here in just a second. And today we're going to discuss church leaders and church hurt. And my thought with this is kind of from two sides of the same coin, the coin being the leaders. But on one side, we need to talk about how elders, deacons, preachers, other ministry leaders might potentially contribute to church hurt. And then on the other side, we need to talk about how can leaders, church leaders, minister to those who have been hurt by the church, whether they inflicted that pain or not. So that's kind of where we're headed with this. We don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So again, we got to caveat a lot of things. Number one, not every leader is a bad leader. Not every member of the church has been hurt by the church or has inflicted hurt onto other members of the church or non-members of the church. So, but we are addressing what I believe is something that is coming to the fore. And based on your comments from last week's episode, you agree with that. So we appreciate that. And we want to ask you to give us grace as we talk through this a little bit. Hiram, you weren't here to sort of kick in your initial thoughts about the topic of church hurt. Is there anything you want to kind of throw in by way of introduction, either related to our topic today or just the topic in general?
I would just say that it's important to discuss. I think sometimes we can make people feel like they don't have a right to say anything about their religious pain or church hurt because of what we might think or how it makes us feel. Just because a person voices some hurt, some disappointment, some frustration doesn't mean that they don't love Jesus or even love the church that hurt them. And we've got to allow people to do that. The only people that genuinely express hurt over the way they've been treated by God's people, the biblical way, are the people that care the most. There's a reason the book of Lamentations is written by Jeremiah. There's a reason Jesus weeps over Jerusalem. Like every Jew in Israel wasn't doing that. But people that care a lot, only people that really love you a great deal can hurt you deeply like that. And so I think we've got to give people space to do that. If we're a family, that happens in our physical family, and it's also true in our spiritual family. And to pretend that such doesn't take place is to fail to be genuine. But at the same time, and maybe y'all talked about this last time and we will today, there has to be a place of rebound and a place of where we press forward and we continue to serve Jesus even when people disappoint us that do the very same thing. So
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, this is why we needed you on here last week, so we're glad you're here today. But Brad, I remember you said something similar there at the very end about, you made an analogy with Jesus, and you said Jesus won't ever leave us, but you also reminded us that no matter what we go through, it won't be as bad as what Jesus went through for us. I think you said something like that, right? Do you remember exactly how you said that?
Sure. Sure. I mean, well, I think part of it was to, let me think, no matter how people representing Jesus treat me, until Jesus mistreats me, I'm not going anywhere. I
There you
don't really
go.
have a
That's what it
reason to
was.
walk away. And I'm not
That's what it
holding my
was.
breath along those lines for him to do that either. So,
Good point.
um,
Yeah, really good point. Let's dive into the issue of leadership, and we're going to begin with sort of the side of this coin that is not as pleasant to discuss, and that, frankly, I kind of hear the most about when we start talking about church hurt, and that is how leaders, and we're gonna acknowledge the fact that preachers are among those. If I'm reading Ephesians 4:15 correctly, I mean Ephesians 4 11 and 12, or 10, 11, and 12 correctly. Um, he gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, or pastor teachers, shepherd teachers. Um, I mean, that text really clearly puts preachers or evangelists in the list of church leaders, along with apostles and prophets whose legacy endures through the written word, though we do not have individuals in modern times who fill those roles. So having said all of that, I mean, anybody who's in a leadership position, whether he or she is over a ministry, and that's why I included ladies in that. I mean, you could be the head of a women's ministry or something like that. You could be in charge of Ladies' Day. You could be the fella who cooks for men's breakfasts. There are responsibilities that we have, and there's a certain way that we need to conduct ourselves, and to realize that if you're in these certain positions, you are certainly open to more criticism, but also it's easier for us to inflict maybe even accidental hurt or damage on another person. So we need to consider all of this. Um, in just a minute, I want us to talk about some leadership principles from Scripture that may speak to helping us to ward off undue, accidental. Certainly, it's all unnecessary church hurt. Do y'all want to weigh in, though, first of all, on just I guess I'm just saying sometimes church leaders do hurt people. Y'all want to weigh in on that? Nobody wants to weigh, because we value our jobs. Okay, we're employed by church leaders, and we value our jobs. That's a joke. Chance, you were going to say.
Yeah, I will just say that even God's leaders hurting God's people isn't a new problem.
Okay.
Like, you can find it in the pages of the Old Testament. You think about King Saul, 1 Samuel 14, King Saul and the people of Israel are pursuing the Philistines. And in a moment of really bad leadership, he puts his people under an oath. And he's like, cursed is anybody who eats food from now until we've avenged our enemies. And, if you read that situation, and it starts in verse 24 with the people of Israel being hard pressed. I think you have the ESV up
Yeah.
on the screen. The New King James says they were distressed.
Mm.
But the word there is the same one that's found for the first time in Exodus 3:7, which is translated taskmasters.
Mm.
So on this day, the people of Israel are again taskmastered, but this time it's not the Egyptians, it's their own leader who
Mm-hmm.
has hard pressed them. And Jonathan will say later in this same passage down in verse 29, my father has troubled the land. And so because of his troubling, his leadership here is bad leadership. The people are weary, they're distressed, the people are fearful. And so when they see the honey and the food in the wilderness as they're pursuing, they don't want to touch it because they're fearful of this domineering leadership that's over them.
Mm-hmm.
And it will eventually, in this text down in verse 33, lead the people to sin because they're so weary and so faint and so pressed by this and burdened by this domineering leadership. And the reality is, like, Saul doesn't even recognize that he's the catalyst, and he just kind of keeps piling things on,
Mm.
even after their sin is revealed. You could go to 1 Kings 14 and you could look at Rehoboam and the opportunity that he has when he becomes king. The people are coming to him and they're like, hey, we've been under this heavy burden of Solomon. There was heavy taxation. Like, if you will lighten the burden, we will be your servants. We'll gladly submit to your leadership and walk with you. And the older individuals give him wise counsel, and they're like, you serve them in this, and you serve them today in this, and they will serve you forever. But instead, he rejects the counsel of the wise older men to go with the counsel of the boys, the folks he grew up with. And instead, he's like, you know what? Solomon, he whipped you, but I'm going to scourge you. Like, I'm going to take this a step even further. And because of that, and there was a great opportunity for servant leadership. And instead, he chose this domineering, fearful approach to leadership. And it just led to hurt and heartache and destruction. And so, unfortunately, it's not new. I mean, you jump over to the New Testament and there's 3rd John, there's Diotrephes who loved first place. And because of that, he caused all kind of hurt in the church. So it's always been around. And I think we're wise to recognize that and then to start looking at our own ministries, the work that we're doing, to put up guardrails, to put wisdom in place that tries to help us guard our ministry and our work from the same kind of hurt and heartache.
That's a great place to start. And I'm just thinking, okay, what were some of the propensities behind these people to do the things that they did? I mean, there's pride. There's a little pride in every sin. Diotrephes maybe is a great example of that. And then you mentioned, as you were talking about Saul and Rehoboam and the others, that there was fear involved in some cases. In some cases, we could call it maybe peer pressure, or, I just kind of want to be with one of the guys, or maybe there's this aversion to the counsel of the older people. Maybe it's ignorance. Arrogance and ignorance mesh together, and so I'm not willing to listen to wise counsel. I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. With a desire to lead, and if you're going to be a leader, it's important to desire that. If anybody desires the office of a bishop, right? 1 Timothy 3:1, that's a good thing to want, but at the same time, we got to keep that in check. Why do you want it? And if you want to be a preacher just so you get to point out what everybody's doing that's wrong all the time, then you have a woefully ignorant view of what preaching actually is supposed to be. So, yeah, I'm seeing a lot of great lessons here, and I guess I'm just trying to say, okay, these things were written and recorded so I can learn something from them. So let me work backwards, and extrapolate the stuff that happened with them, and try and figure out what motivated them to go wrong the way that they did. You guys want to chime in on that or add to it? Chance is gone, so Hiram's going to have to pick it up.
I guess so. Yeah, I was just going to say one of the reasons I think sometimes bad leadership comes into play is because of amnesia, and it's this forgetting that all authority in the world is delegated authority from God. Like, God's the only one who's completely in control. And I think sometimes in the listing of those offices that you mentioned in Ephesians 4:11-13, people can forget that just because you're an elder or a preacher or whatever you oversee or have some kind of authority over, you're not in complete control. God's the one that's still completely in charge of everything.
Yeah.
And I also think there's this false idea that we can make people obey. if people don't obey God, you can be the best and godly leader in the world. People aren't going to obey you. So sometimes from fear, leaders try to use their authority, like, I'm going to make things go my way. And God doesn't even always get his way. So we should realize we won't. We can be as patient and kind and compassionate as we want, but people aren't going to always do what we want them to do. And so we shouldn't try to hurt people into doing that. And sometimes I think leaders hurt people because they're hurt. They're disappointed. Oh, nobody respects authority anymore. People don't want to submit. And so they feel like the way to get that done is to depart from the fruit of the spirit and to use the flesh to try to, wield their rod of correction or authority or whatever the case may be. But I would just say sometimes it's an amnesia, forgetting. Doesn't matter who you are and where you serve and what you do. You've got delegated authority over a certain sphere of influence or a certain jurisdiction in the kingdom of God, and that's ultimately overseen by God. And secondly, people won't always do what we want them to do, but that's no reason to hurt them. And I think about this from a parenting standpoint. Sometimes when I failed the most as a parent, it's been because I got frustrated because my kids didn't do what I wanted the way I wanted. And you just end up making sloppy decisions and foolish decisions because people aren't going to always obey you. And you've got to remember that, and don't allow that to cause you to lash out because you're so upset that why would anybody disobey or not do what I want? I've got their best interests at heart. And I think hurt people, as they always say. And that's true in leadership too. If you get to the heart of church leaders who've hurt other people, or some that may even have a history or track record of doing that, deep down inside is somebody who's insecure or who's experienced hurt themselves. And now in a position of leadership, they're not healed themselves, and they don't know how to serve out of that. And so because of that, it sometimes comes out in a rough and in a ungodly way.
I'm thinking about I'm thinking about a lot of things. Hebrews 13 talks about how we ought to allow our leaders to lead with joy and not with grief. And so I think that at least certainly speaks to the stress that leaders are under. And sometimes the disappointment comes from past stuff. A lot of times we'll assume motives of others because of things that maybe we've seen from different people in the past. And so, well, I know how they're going to respond, or whatever. And sometimes in the church that can be hard because you've watched this kid grow up, and now the kid has become an adult, and let's say he's in his 30s, and you're like, I know he knows better than the lifestyle he's living. Like, I know that his parents raised him better than that. And so out of that disappointment comes almost a frustration that then can come out on somebody the way that it shouldn't. Or I know a lot of us are sort of concerned about the direction of the country. Older members mourn over what they feel has been lost, morally speaking, over the last several decades. It's not safe to let my kids go out and play in the neighborhood anymore like it used to be. And we remember the good old days, where you'd call them for dinner, but you wouldn't call them till dinner, stuff like that. And we keep hearing scary phrases like post-Christian America, the rise of the religious nuns, NES. We hear things that make us feel like people aren't interested in church anymore or the gospel anymore. And I think sometimes as Christians, we can overcorrect and swing the totally opposite direction and become, as we've said before, jerks for Jesus, where we just we feel like we got to scramble to take back as much as we can. And it's like, that's not really how that works. But I also reminded, Hiram, you said in 1 Peter 5, what you mentioned, that leaders are given something to steward. They're not ultimately in control of it. They're just given a stewardship of it for a period of time. And Peter says, you elders, you shepherds, and Peter indicates he also served evidently as an elder at some point. And so he says in 1 Peter 5, one day the chief shepherd's going to come, which sort of indicates you're an under shepherd right now. So don't feel like you can run the church however you want. You can't. The Hebrews writer again in Hebrews 13 says, you're going to give an account for the way that you've led. But this isn't just an elder thing. I can imagine deacons would also be held accountable for how they stewarded the specific responsibilities that they were given while they were in charge of those. And then I know, Paul tells Timothy stuff like guard the deposit, things that are entrusted to you. And so he uses this stewardship language even of a minister. And for that matter, Jesus has a lot of teaching and some parables, most famously the parable of the talent. And it's like, you're given stuff and God expects you to do stuff with the stuff that you're given. So, I mean, all Christians ought to sit up and listen to this and think about the areas where I think some people think, well, I'm just in charge of the meals when there's a funeral and we feed the family. And they think, no big deal. How is that a ministry? And I'm like, but we all know that in the background, behind fellowship meals and in those church kitchens, there's some drama there. Like, we all know it. Everybody knows, don't touch that cabinet because Sister So-and-so just cleaned it out. And if you mess up the order of the way that drawer is organized, she will come at you. Like, every church I've been, that's been a thing. Well, that's fine. I mean, somebody's got to be in charge and keep it organized. But, like, could church hurt be inflicted from some of that? It's very, very possible. So I guess I'm just wanting to encourage all of us to take seriously the things that are committed to our trust, even if you don't think that it's a really big deal. You still need to show the fruit of the Spirit in what you're doing. I don't know. Brad, bail me out, man. What do you got?
I got nothing. I
know that's not true.
They've summarized it well.
All right. Good. Are there? Yeah, go ahead.
Statement
Chance.
from the passage in 1 Peter 5,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, you think about this passage from Peter to these elders, to the leaders of the church, and it's in a letter that's all about suffering. And his point really is in this section, like, Christians are going to face suffering and they're going to be hurt and wounded by the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, church leadership and the shepherd should be a place where they find care and help and healing, not a place where they experience a deeper hurt and a greater pain.
Yeah. All right. Whoa, I did the wrong thing. Sorry. And now I've cut Hiram out. Okay, here we go.
Cut Hiram out.
If you were just listening, you have no idea what happened, and you're better off for it. All right, I'm going to go here because I think this is also something that needs to be said, and we never get a chance to say this out loud. Even among elders and preachers, we should be careful not to inflict hurt. I mean, all four of us know more preachers than we can count on our fingers and toes who are no longer preachers because, and they may not say this because they're people of integrity and they don't want to hurt the church, but because the church hurt them. No, the elders hurt them. And they did that. It's unnecessary. All right. Now, there are moments, it's far too common than it should be, that preachers are boneheads and elders have to respond. Okay. And the four of us understand that. And by the way, I don't presume to speak on behalf of all four of us. If y'all want to say something, you can. I will speak on behalf of myself. But we've got a problem when we feel like elders and preachers are against each other for some reason. And then we have a problem when elders become unwilling to address issues that they may have, even if they aren't major issues. Let's say it's not anything doctrinal. They just feel like something's off. Talk. Have a conversation. Talk about it. Don't bring him in and spank him. Have a conversation. Adult to adult. Better, brother to brother in Christ. And, the flip side should also be true, is that preachers ought to be able to have conversations with their elders if they feel like something's off, to be able to say something like, hey, we haven't met together in like 6 months. Is everything cool? Well, yeah, we just didn't feel like we had anything to talk about. Oh, okay. Because in a preacher's mind, like, your wheels start turning over stuff like that, or if the elders are like, hey, did you preach that sermon about us? Oh, no, that didn't even enter my mind. Or maybe, well, actually, I just thought it was something we needed to talk about. We've got to figure out ways to quit being so passive aggressive and to stop making this political. And I guess I'm speaking to both sides because that's fair. Preachers to elders and elders to preachers, and deacons to elders and elders to deacons, and elders to the family that's kind of on the fringe that you think are about to be wayward or whatever. Just in the church in general, we would spare ourselves a lot of hurt if we would quit being so passive aggressive, and actually just step up and have conversations. Colossians chapter 3, put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, patience, bearing with one another. And if anyone has a complaint against another, forgiving each other. As the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Isn't he saying, like, sometimes you're going to have to put up with each other. You're going to have to bear with each other. But a lot of times these little blips, personality differences, conflicts, it would be taken care of if you would just put love first, which doesn't mean you sweep it under the rug. It just means you have a conversation. You just treat the person the way that you would want to be treated if you were in the same position. Like, that's all you have to do. And I guess I'm just saying we're inflicting a lot of unnecessary pain on each other, and then our churches pick up on that. I heard of a church recently that was secretly recording their preacher, trying to catch him in something so then they would have a reason to fire him. Okay, if you're listening to this and that was you, what? What? There are better ways to do this. And please hear my heart. You don't have to resort to being a private investigator. Just have a conversation. And at the end of the day, if you want to make a change, you can make that change. You can do that. And the preacher will be devastated, but he'll understand if you just come to him and tell him that. He will. But don't feel like you have to catch him in some kind of sin to justify you making that change. One more thing, and I'm going to be quiet so that you guys can tell the listeners how you do not identify with Robert Hatfield today. Okay, but if you're burnt out as a church leader, maybe you need to step away. If you feel cynical, if you feel that your interactions with others don't have that patience that is needed, the humility, that is to say, the lack of pride, maybe you need to step down. Or maybe you just need to ask the other elders if you can step away for a minute. Preacher, maybe if you've been at that congregation for a long enough period of time and you've established enough trust, you go to your leaders and say, guys, I just need to take like 2 weeks in a row just so I can retreat and reset. Is that okay? Maybe you need to do that. Everybody in the church right now, it seems, is running around like a chicken with their head cut off about the preacher shortage. Depending on how much credence there is to this, and I'm inclined to believe there is some, isn't it interesting that suddenly now this issue of church hurt has begun to come to the fore? It's not just preachers who are hurt. It's not just elders who are hurt. But what I'm saying is we have a chronic problem of hurting each other. And we can do better than that. And it will really only take a little bit of intentionality and a lot of the fruit of the Spirit to make it happen. So I wanted to say that. Thank you all for letting me say that a minute. I'm sorry I monopolized the conversation.
No, I think it's right, Robert. And I would say that this idea of, like you were talking about Colossians 3, one of our problems is we isolate texts and we think, well, if this doesn't say, about husbands and wives, then we fail to apply it to our wife or to our husband if that's our situation. And so we fail to see it applies across the board. For example, with elders and preachers, one of the things that can happen in that relationship is elders forget the preacher still needs to be shepherded too. And we can think of it in this employee-employer relationship. And you've got to do your same responsibility toward the preacher as you would to another member. Like, you've got to shepherd him and you've got to help him when he's hurting and come alongside him. And the same thing's true about the preacher. Like, his responsibility to preach the word with all long suffering and patience, that's got to be exercised toward the elders too. I think sometimes there is this disappointment and frustration with elders not getting it quick enough or getting on board with whatever our desire is, or we preached a series of lessons on this and why haven't they moved forward? And so we forget that our responsibilities also work across those different relationships. The same thing with deacons, like, you're a servant to the elders, just like you are in whatever capacity you are serving, especially as a deacon. And so, we can compartmentalize and we think, well, I'm an elder, he's a preacher, we pay him, he works for the church, and we forget he's one of the sheep. Would you talk to any other member of the church this way? And if you would, why? Same thing with the preacher toward the elders. Would you handle anybody else in the church the way you're dealing with them or calling them out? And if so, why? But if not, you just got to remember, we're brethren before we're whatever these titles are. And I think that's one of the big issues that sometimes comes up.
That's a good point. Let's flip to the other side of the coin just for a moment in our waning moments here and talk about how, as leaders, we can minister to those who are hurting. Now, we just brought up the fact that sometimes we're going to have to minister to each other in an effort to do that, and we need to grow to the point personally and corporately, collectively, where we can administer that that to each other, but also be willing to receive it from each other, which can be a difficult thing. But if we've got people who are among us, and if they're still among us, then they ought to be priority number one. Because so many have left because of church hurt. But if we've got people among us who have trouble trusting us, we mentioned last week, I've been aware before of people who had trouble trusting elders at other congregations because they've had bad experiences with elders in the past. And so how do we help people who are coming to us from that kind of posture? First thing is not to deny it, right? I mean, not to act like it's not real or as if they're overreacting. I mean, if they're hurting, we don't have to compare battle scars. We can just say, yeah, you're hurting. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Where should we go from there?
Okay. Go ahead, Chance.
All right.
Well, I wasn't here last
sure.
week. I mean, I'm just trying to stay in my lane. I'll say whatever y'all want me. I mean, I was just going to say
you heard
this.
it here. He'll say whatever we want him to. Hiram, just read your script, man. Come on. You ready?
Okay. Listen, so I love God. No, I would say this, though. When people come to us and they're hurting, we should be concerned with the people that are hurting and not try to hush them up, in the sense of, and hear me well with this, I think sometimes in our efforts to protect the church, we try to push people in a corner and say, don't say this too loud or whatever, because it's going to mess up the church or something like that. And I don't think that's always the case. And I don't think that's people's intention, but let people get their grievance out when they're struggling, especially if they come to you privately, and don't be overly concerned with making sure whatever doesn't happen and blow up into this big thing, because people can tell when they're being managed and not cared for as an individual. And I think people can sniff that out. I think God's going to protect the church. He's got the church under control. I think there's a lot of bad things in the New Testament, like the book of First Corinthians, and God explains those things and puts those out there. We shouldn't want to blast publicly all of the church's bad news, but I think one of the things that earns Christians credibility is when bad things happen and they're legitimate, is we are the first ones to call it out. Nobody hates hypocrisy more than Jesus, and so he would call it out and say, oh yeah, let's put some distance between the Pharisees' hypocrisy and true righteousness and that sort of thing. And so when people are hurting, rather than trying to sometimes defend the establishment or whatever we're after, I think we've got to let people openly and honestly get those things out and then work toward a solution. And whatever falls with that just has to. God's going to protect the church and the church will be fine. But when people are hurting, we've got to remember they are the church. And I think just sometimes people can tell when they're being managed or kind of hushed up so that we can keep the machine moving. And that's just not cool. And I think sometimes we're overly worried about how things are going to look versus, hey, this is a real person with real feelings and real issues. And, you know, we don't want a bunch of negative fallout, but whatever happens, we're trying to be on the side of doing what's right. So we can't control that. Once the hurts happen, you just have got to try to do what you can.
It can be hard to hear some of those things as well, especially from people who are well-meaning. You know, if they're coming to us, it may be because they feel like they can trust us and they're sharing with us information about things that we had nothing to do with. And so we may, you know, as a preacher, sometimes I'm like, man, we got some good momentum going, you know, we're heading in good directions. And then this comes and it's like the balloon is popped, you know, the air is let out of it. And that can be difficult to hear. And there's a temptation there in pride to say, just go off somewhere by yourself, you know, quit. Don't talk about that around here. You're messing up our programs. That's not the right thing to do.
Yeah. I was going to say that we've got to work to make a better culture of availability between leadership and members of the church, or leadership and each other. You know, thinking about it an eldership having time to meet with members and listen to their hurts or to listen to their needs. Shepherding involves, no doubt, making sure that the word is taught and communicated efficiently and effectively. But I think there can be a tendency to put a greater emphasis on that side of shepherding to the neglect of the other side of shepherding, which is tending to the flock, being there for them in their moments of pain and hurt, and being available to listen, to counsel, to walk with them, to pray with them. So there has to be an intentional focus on being available to the congregation.
That's a good point. Everybody's busy. There's always a lot of stuff to do, but this kind of thing needs to take a top priority.
I was going to say one more thing. I'll say this on behalf of Brad because he's thinking. I think when people are hurting, we've got to teach, and series like this help, and openly talking about these things, reading passages like reading the Psalms and seeing how those things worked out. We've got to try to teach our people how to properly process hurt, because if that doesn't happen, then that's how apostasy happens. That's how church splits happen. We've got to prepare people ahead of time. You will be hurt by the church if you become a Christian. If you get deep enough into this, if you walk close enough with Jesus, you're going to be hurt. Nobody's been hurt by the church more than Jesus, and he keeps showing up. So you've got to keep showing up. And so we've got to teach people how to process that so that they don't think that gives them a right to act ungodly, or to cause future leaders to suffer as a result of that, or whatever the case may be. You've got to deal with it, process it biblically, handle it, and don't have false expectations for the church so that you don't get, underwhelmed when people are human. Hold people accountable. Let's deal with the wrongs that have been done, but properly handle things and process it properly so you don't become a wounded disciple who can be of little use in the future because you're so frustrated. You're so much pent up anger that you do become cynical and negative, and you can't say a positive word about good elders or preachers who are trying. Or when you hear a word in a sermon, you automatically transport yourself back to something that was said in the negative way years ago, or whatever the case might be. And learn how to properly process hurt. Church hurt is it's a process. It takes time and it takes spiritual maturity. And depending on how you were hurt and how it worked out, I mean, it can be difficult depending on what took place, but helping our people to work through that so that they can be productive on the other side of that, and showing them how we've dealt with it as individuals and as elders and as preachers, because everybody that gets close enough to the church and invested enough in the church will be hurt by the church in some way, shape, or form. And unfortunately, will contribute to some hurting and disappointing people. Yes. And so how do we process that? Peter denies Jesus. Peter fails in Antioch. Paul and John Mark. Like, there's all kind of church hurt with leaders in the New Testament. But why didn't it just completely break them? And it's because they handled it accordingly.
That's a great point. And while, I mean, it's about, we said last week, Hiram, we're going to have this is, in as much as this is a series on church hurt, it will also be a series of caveats. But, to realize that acknowledging the reality of church hurt doesn't mean we have to major in it. And it doesn't mean that's all we ever talk about, or that we spend all our time on this issue. It's just a thing that's important now, and leaders are going to be the ones who are going to be addressing a lot of this the most.
Can I just say one more quick thing before I forget it? Yeah. I was thinking about this as you were talking, and also about the whole processing it properly. It's interesting that Hebrews 12 doesn't say just don't be bitter. It says, be careful lest any root of bitterness springing up troubles you, and many be defiled. People don't plan to be bitter. It just happens. And over time, you start hating to come where you assemble. You start learning how to just point out how bad everybody did at everything, all the negative things, and that root of bitterness. Like, you weren't always like that. But if you don't process church hurt properly, that bitterness springs up, and eventually it's all you are and all you can see. And you only come so that you can exercise that bitterness toward other people. And so bitterness is sneaky. It can creep up in every one of our lives. Church hurt can be a part of that. And like you said, we can start to major in it, and we want to be careful that we don't do that. So that just kind of goes back to that whole processing it. But the book of Hebrews says it can just pop up and it can ruin you.
Yeah, that's right. Good. And to that point, like, everybody's going to deal with bitterness in some form or the other. And so the positive aspect of that is, Ephesians 4, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in a bond of peace. I'm going to have, in other words, if I'm going to ward off bitterness, I'm going to have to actively put on other characteristics. And you mentioned that at the beginning, Hiram, of what you said a minute ago. I've got to prepare for how I'm going to respond when I am hurt. All right, Brad.
I mean, not everyone listening will understand the history behind the statement I'm going to make, but I have chosen to just simply remain purposefully quiet in this particular episode. Sure. Because there are relationships that have been broken in the past that I have hopes that one day they could reconcile. And I wouldn't want to say anything that could maybe harm those chances. And so I've just chosen to remain remain quiet. So,
well, we should have said it, and I appreciate that. We should have said at the beginning too, the fact that we're here discussing this doesn't in any way imply that, we're giving specific examples of things that are going on at our congregations presently. I mentioned something a minute ago about the recording thing. I mean, that was something that I heard recently, but I don't have any personal affiliation there, other than just somebody, was concerned about what was going on. So, don't listen to this and think that like this is a secret cry for help from all of us. We're big boys, and if we needed to have some conversations, we wouldn't get on our podcast and do this. Okay, we've been doing this for 13 years. We know what not to bring onto the shows. But having said that, somebody needs to be talking about this. We don't claim to be the only people doing it, but I'll just tell you, I felt really strongly that we needed to be, and the other guys sort of said, yeah, we think that's a good idea. And so here we all are talking about this just because we feel strongly that it needs to be discussed. And the point, like For Preachers always is to help to build us up, to help to make us better, not to expose some deep, dark, bad thing. I mean, to Chance's point, as long as there have been leaders, there has been hurt that has resulted from those leaders. So, this is nothing new. It's just something we need to be aware of. We need to be equipped of how we can deal with it. And we need to be actively ministering to those who feel as though they have been hurt, realizing that we can't we can't undo. It's like you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. You can't undo whatever happened. You can apologize, even if you're not the one who really needs to be doing the apologizing, but you can do that. You can listen, you can cry with, and then you can try to make it clear that it is our goal now to do better. And, that's what we can do. I mean, that's what we all can do. Reasonable people, I think, understand that. And we also realize that it takes a while for trust to be built, and it takes even longer for trust to be restored. And so to be patient with each other and to give people every reason to know that you're a person of integrity, that you're a person who is trustworthy, is a really, really important and valuable thing, even as you recognize that you won't do that perfectly all the time. And so anyway, there's some things maybe that we can think about. Final thoughts from anybody. I won't go around and call you out specifically, but if you got something you want to say here as we wrap up this episode on church leaders and church hurt, chime in.
I would just say this in the end, that there are a lot of good leaders in the church. I've served under great elders and godly men who've helped me in times of failing and been there for God's people. And I would just say we need to appreciate those men. I would say once a failed church leader in this area doesn't mean always. People can change, and we have to give people an opportunity to do so. He might have had a bad temper during one season. That doesn't mean he ought to be canceled, or she might have been territorial at this one juncture about this one event, but we don't need to be the people that just never give people a second chance. And so people mess up, people can be restored, and we need to talk about church hurt, but we also need to talk about the spirit of reconciliation that allows people to get divorced from their past, even when they've blown it in this area and hurt a lot of people. And that's a terrible thing, but they don't have to be done, and they don't have to be done leading or serving because of it.
While we acknowledge the fact that, and we talked about this some last week, Hiram, but that there are varying levels of church hurt. I think most of what we're discussing here are more on the emotional level, interpersonal level, in terms of, probably words that were shared. So yeah, I mean, there are certainly moments where, and I know you were saying this, there are going to be moments when maybe someone who served, it might not be prudent for him to serve again. At the same time, and I think I like to believe, maybe this is the optimist in me, more often than not, this is something that forgiveness is available for everybody. I mean, it doesn't matter. If you're willing to respond to Jesus and trust in him with your obedience to his will, you will be forgiven. And all Christians must acknowledge that forgiveness. Otherwise, we've got a problem for which we will need forgiveness. So anyway. All right. Chance, you were saying.
I don't remember, but
sorry. I had the word vomit there for a moment. I apologize.
No, I agree with what Hiram was saying. Like, and even with, we talked about Peter in 1 Peter 5, like just to see Peter's return and his vision and his move forward.
Yeah.
That leaders can turn from bad choices in the past or bad decisions that hurt people and can be transformed. And Jesus can continue to work in their heart and mold them into better leaders in the future. And so that's the goal for all of us, isn't it? That we keep spending time with Jesus and letting him change us and mold us and move us closer to his image better tomorrow than we were today. So a humility that says, I can be pointed to things in my life that were unwise, harmful, hurtful, and be willing to acknowledge it and to then turn from it and keep moving forward.
Well, I'm sitting here thinking, like, one thing we love about Peter is he's a warts and all kind of guy, and the Bible just bears it all for him. But so Galatians 2, Paul has to withstand him to the face over his giving preference to one ethnic group, while not doing that, same as ignoring or shunning another ethnic group. Okay. I wonder if that was a one-time thing from peer pressure or a patterned kind of thing. I wonder if there were, and all we can do is wonder, could it be that there were any people over whom Peter served as their shepherd per 1 Peter chapter 5 who had experienced some of that prior behavior, like the Galatians 2 kind of behavior? At the very least, I mean, this goes back to what Brad was saying last week and reminded us of against this week. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and now he's going to be an under shepherd, like first an apostle. He preaches the first gospel sermon, and then he's serving as an elder. I mean, you want to talk about forgiveness and restoration? So, okay.
And Robert, just one final thing is, we've talked about people, like, if you get hurt by the church, remember to stick with it. Yeah. Until Jesus does me wrong, I won't quit. I just think one more thing for church leaders to remember is we're not Jesus, but a lot of people will make up their minds about Jesus based on the way that we behave. And we might hate that that's true. We might try to explain that away, but the bottom line is, and they'll have to give account for their own sins, but there are a lot of people in the world who will never give Jesus a chance, or will give Jesus a chance, based on the way that we conduct ourselves. And that's elders all the way down. And so that's not a scare tactic to say people shouldn't desire leadership. The Bible assumes that men will and others will, but in different areas. But we should just keep in mind that a lot of people are going to make up their minds about Jesus and the way that he leads and shepherds and treats people based on the way his earthly representatives do, who occupy the roles of preachers and teachers and deacons and all of that. So it's just something to keep in mind, that I would hate to face Jesus, the stumbling block passages, having caused somebody to stumble because of the way that I carry myself in a role of leadership. And it's just a sobering reality the New Testament keeps coming back to, and God's sensitive to it, and we should be too.
I'm glad you said that. And that will be especially true. It's true all the time, but it'll be especially true by the way we conduct ourselves in the midst of hurt or pain, when someone hurts us, or the way we listen to a person who themselves has been hurt. Seems like a good place. Brad.
Sorry, I would just say either way, we need to constantly be in prayer that God would keep us sensitive as we lead, or even as we've been hurt. We need to always be aware and be sensitive to what is going on, and to constantly spend time with Jesus, and to never stop praying about those things. And hopefully, they can turn out well.
Yeah.
So
next week, we're going to focus, I think, a little more on when the flock hurts, members hurting each other. We've kind of focused specifically on leaders this time. And there's a bunch of New Testament examples there and how we deal with some of that. And so we'll get into a little bit of that next week. I want to remind you that we'd love to hear from you. I mean, this isn't a pleasant topic, but is this resonating with you? Are there things you wish we would have said? that maybe we needed to say. You'll help the podcast, but you'll also help us in our ministries. This is one of those series where I'm kind of glad we're doing it so he can help me to be a little more sensitive to others and to even process things that may happen to me from time to time. So if you want to be a part of that conversation, we'd love for you to do that. Mail, M-A-I-L, at thelightnetwork.tv. And all the hard questions, we're going to pass those right along to Hiram Kemp's mailbox, and he will share his answers with us at an appropriate time. So thanks in advance, Hiram. We appreciate it. What's he doing? He's holding up his trash can. Okay. Thanks, man.
Send me whatever you want.
Don't forget to subscribe and follow us and listen every Friday. Stay cool.